hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Soapcast. Today's guest is Amy Dee.
And Amy is the owner of BlackRock Events in Pennsylvania. And she organizes events for vendors to make their sales. And she organizes amazing events that I have joined myself. Amy, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me on.
So I asked Amy to join us today because a lot of soap makers are trying to make money, of course, out of their soap making and trying to turn it into a business and trying to build an actual business now without any kind of local outreach and just trying to do it online is like incredibly hard and requires so much money for marketing and social
Yes,
media.
absolutely.
And not a lot of people are very good at that. Maybe younger generation, but
But
especially not me.
It
So
definitely
vendor
takes a lot of
events,
time to learn all the nuances to it and all
abs
the additional skills it takes to be successful at doing it on your own.
yes, but vendor events
Hmm.
allow us a way to be able to reach customers and get our names out there and maybe make some money. So we wanted to have a coordinator here to tell us about the other side of these things and how it works and maybe some tips and tricks for us. So we are very happy that you are here, Amy. So
Oh, well, I appreciate it.
my first question is, how did you become a coordinator? What's your story?
So I actually started out as a vendor. I spent 20 years hauling all my stuff around. Um, my very first business, we
Many.
actually, yeah, we have 20, 23, 24 years. Yeah. But my very first business, I started out actually as a bakery and I started out in farmers markets.
Hmm.
And there was an evolution to that. It went from farmers markets to festivals to different kinds of local block parties and different kinds of community organizations to private events to and it was around 2016 when I first started organizing some of my own events because I was finding that um there's a lot of events out there where regardless of how great the intention is, a lot of these places or especially organizations, it's a fundraising matter for the organization. And regardless of whether or not they have a really noble and good mission, those people are typically not event coordinators. So, it's hard to kind of go to a place where someone's working outside of their element and maybe doesn't quite know all there is that they really need to know to pull off a successful event.
that's
And I really wanted to just kind of give myself an opportunity and give, in doing what we do, you make so many friends it's a community,
Yes.
and
Yes.
giving the people in my community an opportunity to have more traffic, more visual visibility, all of that kind of stuff. Um, and then of course, there was a break during COVID, but so I've ultimately worked in just about every area of events that there is, because not only have I been a vendor, but I've worked for a variety of different events companies. Um, and all kinds of events, from vendor events to festivals to concerts to everything that you can imagine. So there's a
That's
lot of experience there. There's a lot of there's a lot of things I've picked up along the way. So when it comes to new vendors looking for some tips and tricks, I feel like I have a pretty good um, wealth of knowledge to share, but what works for me and what's worked for people that I've
mhm.
seen may not necessarily work for everybody. So that's always important to really
Yes, of
absolutely.
understand that you have
course.
to put yourself into it and
Yeah,
really express, your own goals and missions in your business.
I
But
Yes.
yeah.
completely agree. I was wondering, so as a new vendor, what would you say are some key important things that I should have prepared before approaching my first event?
So I think the first thing you really need to to decide is what are your goals and what does success mean to you, because that is something different to everybody. So for
Absolutely.
me to say, my idea of success is XYZ, and maybe someone else is telling me no, that's not successful because their idea of success is ABC. You have to determine what your idea of success is, what you want to invest, what you're willing to invest, what you're able to invest, and what kind of return you need in order for it to be sustainable. It's really easy, especially in the beginning, to get burnt out.
Mm-hmm.
Because the beginning is probably the hardest part. That's where you have the biggest financial investment. That's where you have the biggest
Absolutely.
investment of time. And that's where it's sort of it's the hardest hump to get over getting started because of all of that. You know, it's not necessarily as easy as a lot of people. We like to make it look easy, but it is not. It is literally a blood, sweat, and tears kind of thing. And
Yes.
you know, there are so that I think that's one of the big things is determine your own version of success, not based on what other people tell you your version or their version is, you know, um,
Mm-hmm.
because that's really important, you know, and especially when it comes to not getting discouraged, because as I said, there are big investments. It's a lot of time. When you're first trying to build up an inventory, I mean, and you
Yeah.
haven't done a show
Yeah.
yet, it's a big deal, you know. And the first show is really exciting. And if you maybe don't necessarily have a realistic idea of what success is for that show, or maybe let's just say you just picked the wrong show to start out with and you had a show and it was lousy and now you're discouraged. Like, so you really need to give yourself some grace as well, you know.
That's
Um,
true.
but
Absolutely.
then as far as like there's different ways you could look at it. Like, I mean, if we're talking things that we need to know in order to start, I mean, it's really good to have a very general idea of marketing and branding. And if you're not the kind of person who um, is familiar with those types of things or is comfortable maybe, you know, hitting up YouTube and doing a little bit of research that way,
Yeah.
or, you know, just you don't necessarily have that background,
Yes.
there's like so many resources out there just to sort of familiarize that stuff because I feel like branding is really important,
I
you
agree.
know, as well as, you know, just understanding what marketing is, what the difference between maybe marketing and advertising is, and understanding how you want to manage your clientele. That's really important because at the beginning, it's great to get sales, but as you start to build up a clientele, if you don't actually have a stream for them to make their purchases, to connect with them, to follow up, to, you know, manage, you know, customer, if there's ever a customer complaint, if there's ever, you know, technical glitches happen, things like that. It's really helpful to have like a good strategy in place for those types of things. But
Mhm.
for vendors, um, there's a lot of different aspects that I could look at that question, but um, you know, I feel like when you're getting ready to do your first show, from
Yes.
a physical, tangible standpoint, um, I think it's really important to do what you can manage. Me personally, when I vend, I usually have some help. If I didn't, I would probably go about a booth a very different way. So consider what you're able to manage. You know, some people things look great and they're awesome, but in practicality, they don't necessarily work out. So I
Mhm.
always tell people like it may be difficult in the beginning, and maybe you might not be able to, but investing in good quality equipment is really important because the last thing you want to do is get into a rainstorm and have your canopy collapse.
Oh,
Yes.
You know, things like you know, I lightweight tables when you're doing a few shows a week or even just one every weekend, they get heavy and they get exhausting, you know. Thinking ahead when you're purchasing equipment and saying, this is what I need now, but in the future, I'd like to see XYZ. Maybe going ahead and purchasing what it is you need for that future rather than having to purchase something twice.
Mhm.
that's
That's
Um,
yeah.
that's a
you know,
great
and I always, when I'm
point.
looking at like display apparatuses, there's so many really cool looking things, but I always consider how does it break down? How does it travel? How long does it take to set up? You know, what is it going to do to my setup and my breakdown process? You know, what if I'm setting up in the rain? What if it's, you know, what if it's windy? Is this going to blow over? That kind of stuff. You know,
Yeah.
these are all things you want to take into consideration when you're sort of designing your booth in the beginning. Um, so I think those are some of the things that I would say talk to new vendors about. I
Yes.
actually was just working with a brand new vendor this summer, and I told him, I said, hey, like most people, now this is an art vendor, so it's a little bit different than a product, like a usable
Yeah.
product often. But I say a lot of people are going to decide whether or not they're buying from you, whether they realize it or not, before they even walk into your booth. if your booth is cohesive, it's clean looking, it's organized, people can clearly see the merchandise and understand what it is and what they're purchasing and have accessibility to it. I'm like, that's very important when people are walking down a row of vendors and they see something that has a really organized, clean, um, digestible aesthetic. That's really important. It's
Yeah,
fun to have a lot of cool stuff going on, but it's not always necessarily the most profitable.
That's true.
I agree.
And I also think that when first starting, it's okay to not focus on multiple tables, the best like placement of as many
Hmm.
tables as possible in one booth. Like that's not really necessary. I would say just like take one table, put it in front of the tent, like I mean inside,
Yep.
but like in the front and see how that's going. And then maybe once you have more and more products, go into these
Make
things.
adjustments based
Yeah,
on that.
make adjustments
Yeah.
based on that. Like in the, I remember our first event, like we were in a mall
Yes.
and
Hmm.
had like one table, but like, I mean, we never do those events anymore because mall events are like terrible usually. Uh, but that one was good. But like it was just one table, whatever products I had at the time, which are like completely different than what I have now.
Yeah.
So like start small, don't try to build a whole booth with like three tables and
Absolutely.
everything from day one because it is really harder than people think. People just like walk by a
Hmm.
tent and not realize that it took 2 hours to set that whole thing up. And that's physical work and not everybody is going to be able to do it very easily. So
That's very true.
it is
And
best.
it's great when you do it one time and it's a lot of fun, but do it, you know, Saturday and then again Sunday and then maybe do a Wednesday
Yeah.
market. Yeah.
Yeah.
Me.
Shayma is doing that right now. She's doing
Yeah.
Yeah.
Saturday, Sundays, and
Yeah.
Yeah. It gets to be
All weekend.
exhausting.
yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, So I have a lot of people complaining about like boot fees going up like all the time now. Like and I know that you sent a message to everyone which was like really nice. So I would love for you to like a bit talk more about that. Like what are the expenses for a coordinator for an organizer?
So you really have to take into consideration who's coordinating your event. Okay.
Hmm.
Um, a lot of times we have, like I said, we have these wonderful community organizations. We have nonprofits. They do a lot of fundraising types of events. They take in some vendors. They have a couple things going on. They are boosting awareness and so forth. A lot of times, those types of organizations, they have grant money. They have corporate sponsors. They have community sponsors and so forth with businesses within the community that make donations. So their operation expenses aren't necessarily coming from the vendors. So the vendor fees can be minimal, or they can be part of considered a donation to the organization.
Oh,
And
Hmm.
so you really have to take into consideration with that. One of the things that I'm always cautious with those is that a lot of those grants and a lot of that funding
mm,
actually comes based on attendance. And so sometimes you'll also see maybe potentially inflated numbers with that attendance. So you
yeah.
have to be a little bit cautious.
Oh,
And while I'm absolutely an advocate of supporting these nonprofits and these organizations, as a vendor, that's just something that you should be aware of and understanding, how the funds are actually where they come from and how they're allocated. So now myself, I'm a private company. Everything that goes into our event comes directly from the vendor fees. The vendor fees come in, and how much we make in vendor fees determines what we can do within the event. The very first thing that I pay for an event is my insurance. I have an annual policy and I do 1 day policies. And I would say for the average event, it depends on how many people we expect in attendance, and it can range anywhere from 500 to a couple $1,000s for a day. Okay. Um, and then we are looking at advertising. Advertising is insanely expensive, depending on the type of event that I'm doing. It might be a few $100s to a few $1,000s for advertising.
Absolutely.
Um, and then we're looking at entertainment. Entertainment is very expensive.
and
We're
very
looking
important. Yeah.
and important, yeah. So when you're hiring live entertainment, it's one thing, maybe you're spending a few $100s if you're getting one or two people out there just playing the guitar and singing. If you're getting a
Yeah.
band out, you're probably spending at least $1,000. Plus, then you're looking at Okay, who's running the logistics for that? How is sound being handled? How's the electricity being handled? What are your costs for electricity at a venue? Then there's of course your venue fees.
Yes.
What is the venue charging you to be there? Is there a split? Are they taking part of the vendor fees? Are you paying a flat rate? There's so many things to consider. And that
Yes.
doesn't even get into, okay, you're at an event, but now you need to run out to Walmart and grab an extra extension cord for $50 because you still need another 100 foot. Or,
Oh,
printing costs. Me personally, I do a lot of printing. So I have a lot of printing costs. I have a lot of flyers because we still do a grassroots operation.
yes.
And I find personally a lot of success with that. It gets people engaged. And that is just the tip of the iceberg. There are so many, depending on the kind of event that you're hosting, whether or not there's a lot of activities and you're buying materials for those, or you're, offering prizes for certain things. I mean, depending on the event, you just go down the wormhole. But those are like the big overall ones. Is going to be your insurance, your entertainment, your venue fees, and your advertising is going to be the major ones. And for a large event like what we have coming up in December, I mean, you are looking at multiple thousands of dollars is the reality of it. And
Abs-
with the economy being the way it is and costs continually rising, as much as I absolutely don't want to charge the vendors more, because as I said, I was a vendor for 20 years and that was my business, that was my total income. And so I know how important it is to find those high yielding, low cost events because that's where you make your money. But the
Yes.
reality is that just isn't what a lot of us vendors or coordinators are able to do when we don't have additional outside funding, you know?
Yes.
abs-
Um,
And I also think like a lot of those city funded events on the street and everything, the problem is that a lot of the time people are just there to stroll around in their city that they go and give free
mhm.
fun for their kids. And that
Yep.
usually means for something like I do, like I sell soaps, candles, for something like I do, that means I'm not gonna get a lot of sales from that in line with the foot traffic.
because you're
Like, yes,
because you're not the main reason they're coming.
I'm not the reason they are
The
there. They
main
are
reason.
not there to
Yes.
shop.
Yeah.
A lot of time they are there to be able to give their kids the cheapest entertainment possible. So
I would
that
agree with that. Yeah.
so a lot of events like that, it may be cheaper to join, but then it is not a shopping event, so people are not there to shop from you.
Yeah.
They are only gonna shop from you if you are able to show them something that is gonna sway them. Like, and
Yes.
that is much harder than actually give something that when they already are there to buy it.
Yes.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. Unless you have something that's very niche or very consumables usually do well at those types of things.
Yeah,
You know what
food.
I
Absolutely.
mean?
Food. Absolutely.
Yeah, the food, because
Food.
people they'll get a snack while they're out. Maybe they'll buy something, it'll be a treat, but you're right. They'll
Yeah.
usually go and just it's a form of free entertainment for the afternoon.
Yeah,
I agree.
a lot of the time, I have families coming and buying one lip balm from me to keep their child happy, but like they don't even look at the other things.
Yes, no, I agree with
Yeah,
that. I do.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, sometimes I feel like it's absolutely worth going for the higher end events.
yeah,
But that sort of explains now personally, I mean I've seen events this year that I've applied to because I still do events that have been, several $100s to, I mean, we're actually going into the Chris Kindle Mart this year down at the Steel Stacks, and when
hmm
you're looking at the season, it's a few $1,000s,
yes,
it's but you're also getting really heavy foot traffic of people who are there for that, so you're
yes,
absolutely right on in that regard. um so I the only thing I can say is try to give try to give your coordinator some grace because I can't speak for everyone, but I really do try to maintain a fair price. I try not to gouge everyone. I know, unfortunately, I do know certain events of mine are going to have to go up next year.
yeah,
And I try, if I know something's got to go up, I try not to just do it all in one year. I try to maybe add like $50 each year until I get where I know we need to be. The way things have been going, I'm like, I am behind the rate of inflation with that. But
yeah. So
personally, like that's why I do the pop-ups so I can offer something that is less expensive as well.
Yes, that is good.
Hmm.
And of course, vendors, us, are complaining that while our sales are going down due to bad economy, our booth fees are going up. But from your perspective, you have to increase the booth fees because just like us, your expenses are also going up. So like there is really
Yeah.
not much that
Yeah.
can be done
Yeah.
in that case.
It's
Yeah.
awful. Like I have worked with quite a few large venues. And I mean, some of them, just to heat them for the day, can cost a few $1,000s. I mean,
Yes.
it's insane. And I don't think that people realize that. I mean, when you're heating 50,000 square foot,
Oh
like,
yeah. Oof.
and you're there for a long weekend, like people have no idea what
Mm.
that costs if they've never operated within a space like that. It's just it's unavoidable, and it just
Yeah.
trickles down from everywhere, from the cost of the electricity to put the lights on, the cost to heat it, the cost to hire people to be there, what I mean, to operate the event. Staffing is a really big expense that we have. And everyone wants more and more because everything is more and more expensive. And honestly,
Yeah.
like I said, personally, and like I said, I can only speak for me and my company. I try to, like, I want to do the big festivals. I like doing the big festivals. I know people do well at them, but I also try to look for options that, are smaller. You know what I mean? And that's why I try to keep those to a Sunday, because it gives you your Saturday to do your big festival. But if you still want to make a few
Yes.
extra bucks,
That
Sunday's an
is very
option.
smart. Thank you.
That is very, yeah, I didn't even think about that.
Well,
Yeah.
and
Very
that's what I mean.
considerate.
Like I said, I was a vendor, and this is where my income came from. So I feel like that gives me maybe a little bit different perspective than someone who has only been a coordinator and is
Yeah.
only looking at it from a financial bottom line point of view.
Correct.
I personally, like, my business model is that my customers are actually my vendors. And it's
Mm-hmm.
great when people come out, but I'm there to support small businesses. And that's my job, is to give small businesses an opportunity. The product that I sell my customers are the people who come. So I reach my product through my advertising to provide my customers a product, which
Yes.
is the people who are going to come and buy their items. And like I said, not all coordinators look at it that way. Um, but that's just my personal experience that has sort of given me that perspective, because I know that when I go to a show and it's a total bust, it's a disappointment. And the reality is that if the vendors don't return, then the show doesn't go on, because their fees are literally what
Mm-hmm.
pay for everything that event is. So there are
Absolutely.
certain things where we say, hey, come out, have a really good time, and we do the best that we can. And some venues just don't work. Sometimes certain themes, I like to do theme stuff because I think it's fun. Some themes aren't necessarily, like, maybe you're in the wrong area for it, or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's important to sort of understand how all of that works within the event world, that it's not necessarily that, we're trying to, rip anyone off or get over on anyone or take advantage or overcharge, but these are legitimately our costs. And if we want to do it, then that's what it has to be. Other than that, it just doesn't get done.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Definitely. So, do you think, I know that you guys get insurance for the events.
Hmm.
Do you think vendor insurance for vendors to get for themselves is necessary or a good thing?
So I'm torn on that, because personally, yes. And I say that from experience. I know you had sort of said, hey, these are some of the things that we're going to talk about, and I
Mm.
started thinking, I actually have a list of times where my canopy has gone airborne. And as I started thinking about it, I thought, that's actually happened more times than I was thinking about. I was doing a street fair one year, and I would say that on each occasion, I was either well staked down or probably had about 50 pounds on each leg. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I had one occasion where my canopy took off and went through someone's windshield. I
Wow.
had another one where I had a 10 by 20 canopy go airborne and blow about 60 feet, and take my entire booth with it, along with about 300 pounds of weight.
Jesus.
Um, I had another instance where I was actually had a permanent space at a location at an arena, and our booth was a carport, and which was well staked down, probably not only at the legs, but by uh, well, 6 legs, probably 12 ropes, and it went airborne into the middle of the arena during a storm in the middle of the week.
Wow.
So just consider if that hit a person. A
Yes.
Yeah.
deductible on the windshield ended up being $100. It was actually not that bad, but God forbid it hit a person. God forbid it hurt somebody. Then you're looking at a major lawsuit. Not only
Yes.
that, but you're looking at, like, think about what happened with the Fairy Festival. Now, I know a lot of insurance companies will talk about things like that being an act of God when a storm comes along, but a lot of insurance policies will cover loss of merchandise. So that's really important, because if you do have a loss of merchandise, then, or displays, or equipment, say you get a storm that comes along, blows your booth away, you have a computer you're doing inventory and sales with, using as a register, they'll
Yeah.
pay for a new computer. Um, and then there's also portions that will have that will cover, like, say your equipment is in your car and you're in a car accident and you lose your booth in a car accident.
Mm-hmm.
They'll cover up to a certain amount that way. So I think the reality is you have to consider, one, what are you willing to lose and what are you willing to risk? Um, you have to consider the state that your business is in, how much money you're actually making with your business, because some small businesses will actually be covered under your homeowner's insurance. But once you start making a certain amount, then it's very wise to just become an LLC, separate those
Yes.
funds,
Right.
separate that liability, because that's, it is a liability. Now, if you're not making enough for that to be able to afford that, but personally, I think if you can afford it, it's definitely wise, especially when you're doing something like soaps. Regardless of whether or not the ingredients are listed on there, people don't necessarily always read them. God forbid someone have an allergic reaction to an ingredient,
Yes.
especially when you're using things like essential oils. Humans are inherently wise, but not that smart. Um, it's just I think it's a good idea. I think
Here,
it's a
I
good
think we
idea.
should also say that like a lot of these vendor insurances we get don't actually cover product liability. So it is important to make sure that like, hey, are my products are covered too? So when you're getting insurance, it's important to ask that
Absolutely.
and try to
Yeah.
something that will actually cover if your product hurts someone. Because vendor insurances that we can get for cheap are usually about just at the vendor event,
Okay.
like whatever
Yes,
happening
that's
that.
true.
Yes.
So I personally, like, I know that you can get things online through things like
Hmm.
eventinsurance.com or whatever it is. I personally use a broker, because I still, other than BlackRock, I still have another company that I vend with. I use a broker, and at least I can call and I can ask questions and I can say, hey, like, what is covered? What do we need to do to get this covered?
Mhm.
Um, and then sometimes, it's really easy to add certain things on to the policy. So I think it really just depends on where you're at in your business, what you're willing to risk, and what your liability is. If you're doing something that really just doesn't have a lot of liability, well, then maybe you really don't need it. And if you're not making a ton of money, your homeowner's insurance will kind of cover a little bit of it. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah. And if you're operating as a sole proprietor, you can always get a personal liability umbrella policy, and that will give a little bit of cushion, you know.
Oh, that's good to know.
And that cushions you not only in your business activity, but in life. So
Yeah.
it's, there's a lot of options out there, so you can kind of explore around a little bit and see what's in your budget, what you can afford, and what fits your needs.
Since we were talking about tents flying, I had an experience last week about that. Like my tent was fine, but the wind that suddenly came was so strong, like I couldn't keep products in place. So I had to like pack up before they get damaged
Mhm.
because yes, you can weigh your tent as heavy as possible, but wind is still coming inside. And
Correct.
if you
Yeah.
actually put the walls to protect the products, you are actually increasing your risk of losing the tent because
You
walls
basically
protect
turn it
sail.
into a giant, yeah, it becomes a giant box kite.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you can't really save the products with the walls. But like my pet peeves at that time next to me, they almost lost their tent because there wasn't even weight. And the event was next to a river. And
Ooh,
you know how windy that gets. That's why we got that
yep.
crazy wind. And like they didn't even have weights. That's my pet peeve, seeing people with like no weights at all around me. And I'm like, no matter how much I try to protect myself, like
Exactly.
their tent
Yeah,
can come right into my boat. Like that's
exactly. You know, because it's not just you, you're taking on
yes.
liability for of the people that are around you.
Exactly.
And that's not always cool either.
Yes. And
Yeah.
stakes can support when there are weights, but stakes all alone don't really do much.
Yep.
Especially those short stakes that come with the tents when you buy
Oh no,
the
those are a joke.
canopy.
I
Yeah.
always tell people like get like on like good solid stakes, and usually like if I don't like when you look at the foot of a tent, usually there's like two holes, and you
Yes.
can like I usually try to put them through both holes at different directions, at different angles. And I
Mhm.
try to do that on all fours, so no matter which way it goes, there is some kind of tension somewhere. And then if I know that I'm going to be somewhere where there's a hazard, then we'll run ropes too. You can't be too careful, and if you got weights, throw them on top of that too. The
Absolutely.
more you can do to support your booth, the better off you'll be. That's just what it is. That's the reality of it.
Mhm.
You got to protect yourself,
Yeah,
especially in this day and age.
definitely. And this is
Yeah.
September now, and we are getting into the winter. It's already cold here in Pennsylvania.
Oh yeah.
People can guess. So, do you have any recommendations for cold weather and outside events? I remember last year at Krampusnacht, we were all freezing, but
Oh,
we
it was
were in
awful.
good
Yeah.
mood. Yeah, but we weren't actually, because like we were like right next to that heater that you
Yeah.
put in the big tent
Which,
and
Hmm.
working. But also we brought our own heater to keep our feet warm, which
yeah.
helped a
Well,
lot.
that's smart.
And I
So,
wanted to ask if you know of any other ways to keep us warm during that time.
So, I mean, ultimately, when you're outside, you're outside. Especially if you're in a booth, you can try to close it up as much as you can. But the things I usually tell people and the things that I've done in the past. So, yeah, last year with Krampus was about 20 some degrees. And the year before was really nice. But the year prior to that, when we were up at the Pocono Whitewater, we actually had to implement the inclement weather date because we had an ice storm the day before. So
Oh,
not only was it like 20 degrees and freezing, but everything was icy and damp, and it was just awful. And I would say, at the very least, when we're talking booth, if you can at least maybe put three walls on, if you have things like tapestries or banners and signs, anything you can do to add some extra layers to those walls is going to help to insulate a little bit better. A propane heater, just get the kind that's screwed right on
yes.
top of the propane tank, one or two of those. And, try if you're able to, depending on the layout and the footprint of the event, try to maybe set it up so that, the wind isn't blowing into your tent, um, try to set up a couple of those propane heaters. Last year for Krampus, I actually got an electric vest.
Oh, nice.
And I will say I actually did pretty good with the electric vest. I think I was in a hoodie most of the day, and I put it over my vest, and I don't think I put a coat on until probably about 4 o'clock when the sun started going down.
Oh,
So that was a really big help. I liked my electric vest a lot. I wish that I
Electric.
had.
I never heard of electric vest.
They just have like a battery pack, like the kind, like the portable kind you use for your phone.
Hmm?
yes.
They're really nice. I mean,
I'm
they
definitely
work.
gonna get one because my winter
Yeah, I
events are
would
all
recommend it.
outside.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend it. I got one for me and my whole family. I got us all one, and I mean, we're all pretty happy with it. I wish that I had gotten electric socks because you can get electric socks, and I would say
Oh,
that would have been really nice because my toes were frozen.
Oh, wow.
Um, but yeah, I mean, and then you can also get things like, they have like those same with like an electric hat, an electric scarf. Like you can get that stuff and it
Yeah.
will help to bundle you up. I was good with the vest personally. I just put it on under my hoodie.
mhm.
Long johns, thermal underwear, that kind of stuff. Good wool socks, I'm trying to think, but I think realistically, I mean, just taking all of those precautions and dressing in layers, the usual stuff. But those really helped us was like the electric wear and and closing up your tent the best that you can and providing some type of heater. Now, not everywhere permits a propane heater. Definitely not kerosene. Kerosene is a big insurance liability. Some
Mm-hmm.
places will allow you electric heater, most won't, just because of the cost of the electric to run it.
Understood.
I would definitely say speak with your coordinator, see what's permitted,
Mm-hmm.
because not all places permit that kind of stuff. But yeah, for the most part, I would say that those are some of the things that I've used that I
Yes.
liked and I thought were successful. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Carry a
I
blanket with you too. Wrap it around you if you really need. Yeah.
Yeah.
and like we got the propane heater last year, and I was pretty happy with it with just that too, because like you can still warm up your feet, warm up your hands, and that makes a big difference when you have like no other heat source and you just have to stand there. And also when I
Yep.
had all the walls, when the wind wasn't too bad, when I had all the walls, it was like considerably increasing the temperature within the tent
Yeah.
because like all the sides were closed. So like
Yes,
that was
absolutely.
really helping. So I would really recommend that. You just like screwing the propane tank and like use it for a few hours. You know, I would I would
Yeah.
really recommend that. But we are definitely adding those like electric paraphernalia
Yeah, exactly.
into our
Yeah.
shopping list.
Electric jackets, scarves, and such.
So
Yeah. Absolutely.
one more question. At some events, we have, in a lot of events actually, we have like multiple vendors selling the same things or similar things. What
Hmm.
would you recommend for people to be able to stand out in that case?
So I think I'm going to return to what I said earlier about really taking into consideration the look of your booth as a whole. You
Yes.
know, take a step back, when you're at your next event or before, if you've never done an event, set your booth up in your backyard. Do a test run so that you know how everything's going to look. So you're not there the first day being like, oh, I thought it was going to be this, but it really doesn't look right. It doesn't fit here, whatever. But set your booth up, take a step back and look at it from the perspective of, if you were someone who's just walking by, do you want to walk into that booth? Does that look appealing? Does that pique your curiosity? Consider your whole booth at your booth as a whole and think of the aesthetic appeal. And I'll use soap as the example. If you got a person who has a one table with a few bars of soap on it and a tablecloth that doesn't really match or have an aesthetic or have a look or a branding to it. There's just some bars of soap they made in couple months ago or whatever. And then you have another booth that has, a really nice layout. Maybe their tablecloth matches the color of their banner. They have some really clean aesthetics, some nice organized, symmetrical displays. Everything is not grouped together and cluttered and look like it's thrown on the table. It's like all the soaps are clustered, they're labeled, they have nice names. And when you're walking by and you can clearly just at a distance see what it is they're selling, what their brand is, that's more appealing to walk into and go approach and ask questions than someone who really just didn't take the care to do that.
Mhm.
So I think really just care. Branding, I feel like, is really important because your branding is what people are going to remember. And that's why I feel it's worthwhile. you know Take some time. If, say, you're a busy person, when you're, instead of doom scrolling for 20 minutes before bed, watch a YouTube video on branding. You know what I mean? 10-minute video and then doom scroll for 10 minutes, so that you can start to understand what it is that is going to catch people's eye, the things that people are going to remember when they leave that event, and maybe are going to look you up, or maybe that they're going to remember the next time they run into you and say, oh, I remember
Mhm.
that person. I saw that they had, let me go check that out.
Yes.
Um, and looking at the booth as a whole organic entity. What
Definitely.
is going to draw people to that table and to that booth? I Like, I sort of was just talking to this vendor I've been helping lately. They were looking at doing some things on a budget, and they were like, well, I found this 8x8 booth, and it's a little bit, it's like $75 cheaper. I think I'm going to get that. And I'm like, listen, like, I know that that's a thing, but I also know that you want to grow, and there's only one
Exactly.
configuration that you can use where you can fit more than one table in that, and it's going to be two sides parallel. And when
Yeah.
people walk by, they're not going to be able to see what you're selling.
Yes.
Hmm.
So it's worth spending the extra $75, getting a 10 by 10. And
Completely.
now you have a front people can see what you're selling, you
Yeah.
know, and because I think that that's important. People need to be able to see what you're selling without it looking cluttered, without having questions. And my big thing that I tell people a lot is that if people have to ask questions about your product or you need to explain your product, you probably should rethink it. You know, unless you're at a point where people are going to ask you questions already and be like, hey, what is this that you did? But if you have to really explain your product, um, you really should put serious thought into your advertising, your marketing of that product so that people don't get confused before they walk
Mhm.
away. You know what I mean?
I
Because
agree.
people will. If they're just confused by what you're doing, and that's what I mean, if they're confused when they glance at your booth, they're probably going to walk by it.
Yeah, definitely. And also over explaining, which is something I do all the time.
Yeah, I try not to do that.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that one too. I do that with my Boilo. So the other company that I have is Cold Country Boilo, and we do it's a traditional spice drink that is like specific to the coal region of Pennsylvania. And most
Mhm.
people, unless you're from the area, don't know what it is. So it requires that explanation. And in my case, that is the product, is the history that goes into it. But if I'm in a setting where I
Yeah.
do not, we have a busy crowd and I don't have the opportunity to really talk to people,
Yeah.
then I have to have adequate signage that explains to people in a glance what it is that they're about to taste, you know?
Yes.
And that's really important. So you need to put thought into that kind of thing. Now, soap is a little bit different, but people know soap and they instantly want to pick it up and smell every one, you know?
Yes,
But,
that's true.
And
you know, and,
still,
and
I go into the
that's a
chemist
bonus.
of it.
Yes. But no, I get it. Like soap is, I feel like soap and candles, you know, even when I'm in the stores, like me and my kids would sit there and smell every candle, we smell every bar. Like, what do you think of that one? Do you like this one? Do you like this one better? Which one do you like more? You know, and it's that's almost like that's the experience that people are getting
Absolutely.
with
Mhm.
that kind of tactile, experiential kind of product. You know, yeah,
Mhm.
it's nice.
And like for visual branding, I know a lot of everyone, of course, has their own design ideas and what they like. And a lot of people I see, which is very successful, go for that modern aesthetic of like, that Pinterest aesthetic of like beiges and like maybe little bit color pops here and there, but mostly like beige,
Yeah.
which I don't like. My thing is like Amy knows me from events, so she would know.
Hmm.
Color.
Yes.
I'm very colorful. Big displays, colorful displays. My soap display is so big that I can't even take it apart. I have to put it on a whole seat in the car in its own
Yeah.
space and then carry it like that. But it's huge. It was the biggest one that I can find. I got it
Hmm.
specifically done. So like it's big, and when people see it, they know what they are looking at because
Absolutely.
our
Exactly.
are also like very big banners, like
Very
uh,
clear in the message.
very clear. This is what we sell:
Yes.
soap, skincare,
Yep.
candle. Come here, do it.
Yes. Absolutely.
Yep.
Like
And that is helpful, you know, because those big eye-catching things, they're going to draw people, you know.
Yes.
mhm. And once they are drawn, do not make them ask for the price of anything. Just like price
Yeah.
out, clearly
Yep.
visible, because people do not want to ask for price. A lot of people
Yeah.
don't want to ask for price. Like if I have to ask for the price of something, I personally don't buy it if I don't have to, because
Yeah.
I feel so uncomfortable. Because if it is too high, it's like I am saying, sorry, I'm broke, I can't buy this, and I don't want to say that.
No, I understand that. Yeah, you
It
have to
is
make
such an
people comfortable.
uncomfortable feeling. So don't make people ask for the price. Make sure that it is visible, big,
Clear.
clear. Yes.
Yeah. And you
Mhm.
know, one of the things that I know that a lot of people run into are those like awkward moments when people walk in and maybe they're not the most social, maybe they're like a little introverted and you can tell they're a little uncomfortable in the booth, you know, practicing your ability to sort of gauge the level of engagement that your customers are prepared for is also kind of helpful, you know, because the more
Mhm.
comfortable a person feels in your booth, the more likely they are to spend with you, you know.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I know sometimes, like, as a salesperson, you get really excited. You got a new customer. Hey, how are you doing today? And all of a sudden, they're just kind of like,
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
and then they run away, you know. So sometimes it's just practicing some of those people skills, not everyone naturally has it, so not everyone just sort of can pick up on that, but some of those things are helpful to sort of just be mindful of.
Yes.
Mhm. I
Yeah.
find that trick of playing around with your boot helps a little bit. Like if
Yes.
someone came in, I'm like, "Oh, welcome. These are all handmade. Ask me any questions you want." And then like I act like I'm like playing around with like placing things and stuff.
Excellent.
So to give them a little bit of time, and if they
Yep.
seem like they wanna talk, and then I go.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Because you can't
Yeah.
know from the first look at a person if they want to talk or not. It is very hard to be able to gauge that.
Yeah.
But if you have a little bit of time, if you give them a little bit of space, they usually show
Hmm.
you what they want.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, what you just said, I think is actually a really good point too, is when because I actually stopped vending full time during COVID.
Mhm.
And so, but prior to that, I never sat in my booth. I stood all day long. And I would have a chair in case at the end of the day I wanted to sit for a couple of minutes, but generally I stood. When you're eye level with someone and you look busy and you're engaged and you're, active with them, it makes a really big difference than a person who's just sitting in the corner of their booth greeting people.
Yes.
I literally had a vendor come in one time who had an amazing line of handmade products. I loved what they were making. And I was like, oh, they're going to make a ton of money. And everyone at my event had pretty good feedback that day. Some of them had amazing feedback. And she was the only one. She's like, I didn't make hardly what was worth coming out here. And I kind of wanted to say to her, yes, but you sat in the corner of your booth reading Harry Potter all day.
Oh, wow. Oh,
You
yeah.
didn't speak to people. You glanced up at them when they arrived and you read a book. And I'm like, that unfortunately, and I'll admit there are days when, like I said, I used to be out, 2, 3, 4 days a week doing stuff. Some days you're tired, some days you're worn out, some days you're just not in it. I get it. And I've had days like that, but let me tell you, it reflects in my sales, you know. So I will say, taking care of yourself is probably pretty important. I know right now I have a big season coming up and I actually injured my foot. So walking and
Oh
standing
no.
for long periods of time is really difficult for me right now. And I've got a pretty hefty limp. And I'm like, I gotta get to the doctor. I gotta finally take care of this because I need to be able to be on my feet. I need to be able to engage people with a smile that isn't
Absolutely.
pain inflicted. Do you know what I mean?
Yes,
So
Yes.
absolutely.
taking care of yourself, making sure you go to bed early the night before, you're not too tired,
Yeah.
that you get up early enough so that you can be there on time, give yourself enough time to set up so that you're not running around stressed and setting up because,
Yeah.
that frantic energy will carry over into the beginning of the day and, just give yourself a chance, you know what I mean? Be good to yourself in the process because I think that's important too. Like I said,
Absolutely.
especially in the beginning, it's easy to get burned out.
Yes. And
Hmm.
pain starts, especially like if you are not very young.
Yes.
Pain starts pretty soon when you start vendor events. That's what I realized because your body is
Yeah,
not
it
used to
does.
that kind of activity a lot of the time for a lot of people. Like I have an office job, so I was obviously not carrying weights and like building tents and everything in my life.
Yep.
Of course, like this, like pains start in like places like the hips and the legs and the arms and everything. So it's very important to take care of yourself. I
Absolutely.
completely agree.
Yeah. Yeah. It is. It's a different kind of work. And I feel like there's like a certain breed of us that are just all cut out for it. And the job itself weeds itself out, the business.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You have to be a little bit of a glutton for punishment.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Especially if you are selling something like me. Candles and
Hmm.
soaps are like, I feel like they are the heaviest things. And I'm like, why am I not
They
selling
are.
stickers?
Yeah.
Have
They are
stickers.
heavy. You're
Give me
not kidding.
stickers.
Yep. No, I'm with you. At one point, so for years I had a jewelry store. So I had a jewelry store and we did for the most part we did like crystal jewelry, like boho jewelry and so forth at vendor events, but then I also had a couple of different locations within different farmers markets which were primarily body jewelry. And the
Wow.
body jewelry, when I would take it out to an event and I would like be carrying like trays and trays and trays of it. Mind you, it's steel. And I'm
Mm.
like, God, like this stuff is heavy. Like, what the
Yeah.
heck, Like,
Yeah.
but yeah, there are certain things like you don't necessarily think of. They're tiny little pieces of jewelry, but when you got, a tray
Yeah,
and there's a few hundred of them in there, it's like,
yeah,
wow,
that's metal
that
inside.
really, yeah, yeah. But yeah, you got to take care of yourself, you
Absolutely.
know, because it is easy to overdo it in that kind of work. Yeah.
Amy, do you have any questions for us or anything else you would
Or
like
any
to add?
last minute pointers you
No,
have?
but I appreciate that you guys had me on here and I enjoy sharing, my experience with other people. It's not necessarily what they may experience, but if it can help somebody, I'm more than happy to share, you know. I want
Yes,
to see
I'm sure
everyone
it's
be
gonna help
successful.
people.
Yeah, I'm pretty
Mhm.
sure our audience is going to find this highly informative because it
Yes,
was for us. It
yes,
was.
Well,
definitely.
thank you.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Have
Have a nice
a
day.
great day, Amy. Thank you
Oh,
again.
you too. Bye bye.